Our first session is where we're going to talk about the HR technology market in disruption. Question is, what's coming next? Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome on stage founder of Bersin by Deloitte, analyst, author, thought leader, Josh Bersin.
Wow, all right, you're going to have to listen to me. I'm going to actually talk. So I think this is the third year I've been here, Esther. I don't remember. I think I skipped a year. And I always enjoy coming. I was just telling Jason, India is the most amazing country. It's a long way from California, but it's well worth the trip. And what I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes or so is try to make some sense out of the 100 or so vendors that are out there in the hall and give you a sense of what's going on. And the best concept or paradigm that I can think of is the idea of what I'm now going to call, and I just sort of came up with this the other day, HR and the flow of work. So stay tuned and I'll tell you a little bit about what that means. But the first thing I want to talk about is nothing in technology makes any sense unless it's aligned with the business that we're trying to solve, the business problem we're trying to solve. And we're going through a lot in the world of business. We're in the 9th or 10th year of an economic growth. We have Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X, boomers, whatever the next generation was after that, all living and working together in the same organizations. We're living longer. We wrote a report on last year at Deloitte that the average career will probably be 70 to 75 years. So we have a lot of issues to think about there. The technology obviously is disrupting where we work, and it's also affecting our daily lives. In fact, most of the studies that we do now, and I'm still affiliated, by the way, for most of you who don't know this, but I'm actually not a Deloitte partner anymore. I retired from Deloitte. I'm now a contractor to Deloitte. I didn't retire, I just retired from Deloitte. And if anybody's curious. And so I'm still working on the human capital trends, and the 2019 human capital trends, which will be out next May, we're finding out again, technology, robotics, automation, AI, all this stuff that I used to watch when I was a sort of a kid in college in the 70s is actually becoming real. But we don't really know what to do with it all because most companies are saying that the challenge is we don't have the right skills, we don't have the right structure, we don't have the right organization design, we don't have the right reward systems. And CEOs are worried about this. And in fact, I watch this data a lot. The Conference Board, which is a large research company in the United States, surveys about 400 or 500 CEOs every year, and the topics on the minds of CEOs are all about talent and skills and performance management and diversity and pay. They're not last year it was about cybersecurity and immigration and nationalism. That's actually not the issue on people's minds. So HR has really got some problems to deal with, plus the fact that productivity is actually lagging. And I noticed that there's a lot of talk about productivity out there. I believe that the real key to HR going forward, for all of you, for all of us, is becoming really the chief of productivity. If your employees are using your programs and they're getting more work done, they're going to feel better, they're going to be happier, your organization's going to be happier, they're going to be more engaged. So this is really the key, and that's a little bit of the secret as to what's going to happen in HR technology, is how are we going to build systems in the HR function that actually do make people more productive, which is a long way from where we started, 20 years ago when I started as an analyst. Most of you have seen charts like this before. This amazes me, and it's worse than ever. I don't know, in my particular case, maybe it's because of what I do, I get emails on multiple accounts. I get messages on LinkedIn, I get messages on Twitter, I get messages on my phone, I get messages on Facebook when I log in, which isn't very often. And there's probably 10 other places where people are sending messages that I'm not even seeing. And we did a study at Deloitte last year, and we found that the average large organization has 7 different messaging systems, which people are trying to figure out how to use. And we've got more coming. So we have to deal with that. Our employees are working more hours. I don't know what it's like here in India, but it's probably just like it is in the United States. In the United States, we've lost an entire week of vacation in the last 20 years. We're taking a week less vacation because we have so much information and things to do at work. And employee engagement is not going up. And for all of you that have booths out there, all of you vendors that are working on engagement or selling culture tools, you know, congratulations, it's not working. I mean, we haven't figured it out. It really hasn't changed. I've been looking at this data. The average engagement in Glassdoor is about 2 or 3% higher than it was in 2008 during the recession. So we're still stuck with this workforce going through this massive amount of change, and the technology isn't really helping. Now, one of the other things I want to talk about before I get into the tech market is this. Perhaps the most interesting change in the workforce, in addition to technology and productivity and engagement and retention and all the things we talked about in a minute, is this. We're now living in a society around the world where we don't really trust our political institutions the way we used to. And I won't get into that. I heard it all day yesterday and the day before about what's going on in India. But we do trust businesses more. And so CEOs are suddenly being asked to take a social position on topics and act on behalf of their communities and their stakeholders and their shareholders and their employees and their customers in ways they really haven't been asked before. And when we were studying this at Deloitte, we basically realized that the future of business, at least for the next few years, is becoming a socially conscious enterprise. And so one of the things that's really important is developing a technology strategy that provides a sense of purpose and meaning and transparency and fairness. You can't afford to buy technology that implements practices that somebody coded in AI that do bad things to your people. You're not going to get away with that. In San Francisco, where I live, which is, you know, there's half the people in the Bay Area work in tech, maybe 3/4 of them. Look at this data. It's absolutely mind-boggling. People don't trust tech companies anymore either. We don't trust Facebook. We don't trust Twitter. We don't believe these companies are acting on behalf of the economy, and they're really not. They're just trying to make money and keep their stock prices high. And that is all reflected on our businesses. And I think here in India, from the companies that I've gotten to meet, and I've met with a lot of you, you have a social consciousness, and if you don't have a social consciousness, that has to be part of your mission. Now, what does all that have to do with technology? If you look at the broad trends of technology, of where it's been and where it's going in HR, I really think it's gone through 3 phases, at least during my time as an analyst. We started with this idea of automating paper processes in talent management. If you look at the talent management software that we did all sorts of research on the last maybe 20, 15 years, it was mostly forms, and it was designed to eliminate paper and automate and integrate data processing that we needed to do in HR. Didn't really do that super well, but it worked. And we had to train people how to use the systems. There was a lot of change management required. And the HR business partners really did a lot of this for us because a lot of employees didn't like to use the systems, so HR did it. And then we moved into this world where companies like Workday and we had the mobile phone apps, and the paradigm, I was talking about this yesterday, the paradigm of the consumer internet gave us some new ideas on how to build user experiences, and we built tools that were more useful to employees. And the real era that we've been through in the last, maybe decade is HR software that employees can use, not just HR. Now, that's not going to say they're going to use it all the time, because in a given week, I might only spend 5 minutes on anything that has to do with HR. The rest of it is actually doing my job. But those systems have gotten better, and most of the vendors that were in the first phase either made it into the second phase or went out of business and got acquired. The world we're in now, that is really the world that I really want to talk about for the next 10, 15 minutes, is a world of systems of productivity. Systems that don't just do HR stuff, and more of the HR stuff is going to happen behind the scenes by AI, but we actually use them because they help us to get our job done. They're intuitively useful, meaningful, purposeful, and so they don't feel like they're an interruption, and they actually are producing HR in the flow of work. And so for all of you that are vendors, and I know a lot of you are, I think if you think about that and try to design a solution of some kind that people can use while they are working, you're going to be a huge success in the next decade, because that's really where this is all going. So let me walk through 8 quickly. I know I don't have too much time, but let me walk through 8 parts of this evolution and give you a little bit to think about, and then I'll just wrap up. The first is the core HR market. The core HR technology market, Oracle, SAP, Workday, ADP, the big vendors, is enormous, and it's growing like mad. The reason is that we still have a lot of legacy software that we're trying to get rid of. The problem the big vendors have, though, is they're not keeping up. Payroll, core HR, global compliance, GDPR, reporting analytics, the basics of what they do is hard. And so most of the ERP vendors, there's a few exceptions, are really struggling to keep up with the evolution as it moves forward. In fact, if you look at the data on the ERP vendors, they are not getting good marks for ease of use, integration, or value to their end user employees the way they want it. And that's the reason for that is not because they're not good companies and they haven't tried hard, is there's just too many things for them to do. And the world of ERP still is a core platform, and there's going to be tools on top of it. The second thing about ERP that's interesting in HR is that everybody's getting into it. I spent a lot of time talking to software companies, and every one of these companies has a strategy to make $1 billion in HR, every single one of them. And they're going to do it. So in this 9th year of this economic boom, and we're all doing a lot of hiring and a lot of training, these ERP guys have a lot of competition. So I'm not going to tell you who's going to win and who's not going to win, but the market's gotten very, very crowded. And they've shifted focus. If you look at the tools and technologies that we built in the early 2000s, and what happened when cloud came along, the orange area, when all the cloud HCM vendors were formed, we started to focus on new applications. And now you're asking for online continuous learning systems, continuous performance management tools, tools to manage organizations as a network that don't operate as a hierarchy, tools for well-being, tools to assess culture, tools to do pulse surveys. That's a lot of software. And the ERP companies are not necessarily ready to do that. And so they're pushing as far as they can up and to the right, but they can't keep up. And actually, a piece of research that came out last year from Sierra Cedar showed that the number of systems of record in HR almost doubled from 2017 to 2018. So most of you are buying more tools from more vendors than you did a year ago, despite the fact that the big ERP vendors are investing heavily in the market. Which leads me to the second point, talent management. Now, I don't know what to call it, but talent management is done. It's over. The whole idea of talent management when it was conceived, and I had a lot to do with defining it at the time, was about pre-hire to retire HR processes. That's what it used to be called. Well, we don't work that way anymore. First of all, most of us work at many, many companies during our career. The businesses we're in, a lot of times, are going through disruption, reorganization, and change. And this idea of managing an employee through their entire life cycle is really not the problem. The problem is really managing them in the new management model. And the new management model is all about teams, empowerment, mission, purpose, clarity and transparency of goals, giving managers the opportunity to contribute to the technical role that they're a part of and not just sit behind a desk and act like a manager. It's a totally different management environment, and we need tools for that. And I've been, the one example, for example, this I'm going to talk about in a minute, is, in performance management. Most of you are probably going through some process of building a continuous performance management process or system or program in your company. Go try to find a piece of software that does that. You're not going to find it. It's barely available because all those tools are coming from small companies that are just barely getting off the ground. So all of these little circles that I have on these slides are going to be legitimate markets of tools and companies and software that will evolve and mature over time, and that's really where the talent management market is going. I think if you look at the evolution, it looks a little bit like this. We have a new set of engagement tools, we have a new set of performance management and feedback tools, we have a new set of learning tools, we have a new set of well-being and rewards tools, and by the way, one of the things I've discovered in the last year is maybe the most disrupted area of HR to come is the way we pay people. We found out in the research we did on rewards that only 1 in 5 companies believe their reward system actually is aligned with their corporate strategy, which just blew my mind. And the reason for that is we're still paying people the way we have in the past. We've got the same salary bands, we've got the same annual reviews, we have the same policies of secrecy on who's getting paid what. All of that's going to get disrupted, and then we're going to have a whole new set of tools for the employee experience. So there's a lot of innovation going on. And what you find is that the incumbent vendors on the left, as hard as they worked a decade ago to build the great systems they have, are now dealing with all of those guys on the right. And these are mostly the companies that I talk to in the US. There's probably just as many right here in India that are really reinventing the market. So that's kind of the exciting thing about that. The second part of the talent industry is recruiting. And let me just take 1 minute on this. In a market where the unemployment rate is 3.8% or 3.9%. I don't know what it is in India, but in the United States, there are more jobs than there are people. There actually aren't enough people for the number of jobs we have. By the way, this whole idea that robots are going to do away with jobs is actually not true. It's the opposite. We've created so many jobs, we don't have enough people for them all. And so it is a huge battle to find people, to assess people, to recruit people, to source people, to attract people, to market your business to people, to get them to come and work for you. And so this is just an enormously fast-growing market. In fact, I think William Tincup is kicking around here somewhere. You can talk to him about what's going on in the recruiting market. It's perhaps the most innovative and the biggest application of AI today because it is such a big market. And we don't even know what the impact of companies like Google is going to be yet. Google for Jobs, which was a small team that innovated sort of in a skunk works for a couple of years, was unleashed on the market, and it ended up forcing Glassdoor to sell themselves to another company. It's made a lot of changes. You guys probably don't know this, but there's a lot of stress going on in the recruiting market, to say nothing of the impact of LinkedIn being acquired by Microsoft. So that's going to be a really interesting area. Let me talk 1 minute about AI. AI is one of these buzzwords like mobile. You remember 3 or 4 years ago, mobile was like black magic? Oh my God, these guys have mobile. We got to buy from them, right? And they were the only ones that had it. Now everybody has mobile. It's not even, you don't even talk about it. If they don't have mobile, you wouldn't even think about buying the software. That's basically what's going to happen to AI. AI is basically algorithms based on data. It's software and mathematics that's intelligent enough to look at a large data set and predict and recommend behaviors that are most likely to be positive based on history, based on algorithmic patterns in the data. You need to have a lot of data in order for AI to work, and you have to have the algorithms. The algorithms are actually a commodity. You can get the algorithms right on the web from IBM. The APIs are free. You don't have to hire necessarily an AI guru to do AI. Now, a lot of companies do, but I think AI itself as a technology will be a commodity. What will not be a commodity is how you use it, the data that you have access to use to train your system, and how it works in your company. And I won't spend a lot of time on this right now, but there's going to be a lot of changes in the way we operate technology in HR, because we're going to have to monitor this stuff and make sure it's actually doing what we want it to do. And the best example I can give you that is this idea of bias. Let's suppose you buy a piece of software that's trying to remove bias in recruiting or leadership or assessment or wherever it may be. Where's it going to get its data from? It's going to look at your history. It's going to look at the past. And it's going to find out things like white males over the age of 45 more likely go into management, because that's the way your company's operated for the last maybe 30 years. So it's going to try to predict whether a white male should be promoted or a black female, which is going to be incorrect and biased. Those kinds of things are going to happen in HR software if we don't watch out for it. And we as vendors or as HR professionals are going to have to teach this software how to be smarter and smarter and how to do what we want it to do. So my hat's off to all these vendors that are using it, but it's going to really change our roles significantly. The third thing I want to touch on is performance management. Now, this is actually an enormously big market. Every company I've ever talked to does some form of performance management, whether they talk about it or not. So if you could automate it, you would. Now, it's hard to automate because basically it's a people process. But what the research has clearly shown is that some form of continuous conversation has a hugely positive impact over doing it once a year. And everybody's figured that out. That secret's out. The question is how? What tools do you buy? Do you use software? Do we do our check-ins on our phones, or do we do our check-ins face-to-face? Do we have a goals management system that everybody can see that uses OKRs? Do we have a system that goes out and sends emails to our employees and gets anonymous feedback on our behalf? All of these creative ideas are being figured out by vendors. And what I've done on this chart, and I didn't put the vendor names, is I just tried to show you the vendors that I've talked to in the last year or so and where they fit in this world of performance management. And I think for most of you that are good-sized companies, you're going to find some really creative, innovative solutions in performance management available in the market that really are going to change the way your company is managed. And I just wanted to throw a couple screenshots in here. Last week or the week before, one of the very successful small performance management companies in the United States was acquired by a social rewards and recognition company, which is sort of a weird thing, but it shows how quickly this market is changing. The idea of recognition being part of performance management is a relatively new idea. The fourth topic I want to touch on very briefly is well-being. Everybody's interested in well-being. The reason they're interested in well-being is because we're all stressed out by all the emails we're getting. I mean, this is Google Trends. I mean, it's really shooting up. Well-being is a software market for HR. It has moved from a market of health and fitness software to a market of engagement software to a market of performance software. I'm going to put out a report on this later this year. I'm working on it. But there are applications you can buy for well-being that are very, very engaging behavioral change applications, more useful and more highly engaging than Twitter. Engagement, we talked about that really briefly before. The tools for employee engagement and pulse surveys are everywhere. And the market is moving to one of continuous feedback and continuous surveys and continuous capture of information. If you're not experimenting with this, you should. I have not talked to a company who has not found value in this category of software. Now, all the ERPs told us they were going to build these things. They haven't been able to get around to it, so this is becoming a market. The learning platform market. There's some interesting learning companies over on the other side of the building. The LMS market is being literally disrupted by products like Edcast and Degreed and Fuse and a new generation of companies that can provide what are called learning experience platforms for your employees to learn. The learning management systems industry is not going away, but there's an enormous amount of creativity and innovation in learning now available. And I won't get into all these tools because we don't have time, but this is a really big market. This is a $200 billion market, the corporate training market. There's lots of opportunity there. I think over time, and this may be not as long as you think, we're going to see this kind of convergence, where a lot of these companies that are $20, $30 million companies are going to realize, if I'm a performance management company and I merge with a recognition and rewards company, we can build a more integrated solution. And we're going to basically rebuild what we did in the early 2000s. The whole talent management market is going to reform itself around all these new tools. And the acquisition that I wrote about the other day is really just another example of that. Okay, let me just wrap up with a couple of other quick things, and I'll leave you with one final thought. Analytics is not going away. It has not gotten that much easier. Most of the companies I talk to are very heavily investing in analytics. They are no longer doing science experiments. They are trying to figure out how to put analytics in the hands of line managers. If your analytics function is 3 PhDs in the corner running statistical analysis, you're probably not in the right spot right now. You probably need to move to the right and really look at an industrial strength solution. There's all sorts of data we have in the organization that we never knew we had before. This is an example of something called organizational network analysis, which you can now get off the shelf from Microsoft. If you buy Office 365, this comes almost for free as part of using the new Microsoft technology. And this is vitally important in understanding how your organization actually works, not how it works on the org chart. And that's an area that's going to be really big in HR. The final point I want to make, and then I'll wrap up because I'm a little bit over, is getting into the flow of work. How many of you have a program or a strategy or a job called employee experience? I mean, all of a sudden there's 100 books on the employee experience. The employee experience is another new buzzword for HR's attempt to take everything that we do. By the way, everything we do in HR is part of the employee experience. That's why it's kind of a silly word, but anyway, and try to reform it in a way that applies and improves the work experience of every individual in the company. And it's a big deal. I mean, everybody's working on it. And there's lots of people with jobs called the employee experience. And generally, the way most companies define it is they define it as a project of looking at the moments that matter, the transitions, the periods of time in your career when you are under some form of stress, and what can we do in HR to make that easier. Now, if you go back to all the slides I just showed you and all the material I just talked about for the last 20 minutes, none of those tools are designed for this. They're all designed for HR functions. So there's a new category of software being built in the middle to help you with the employee experience. Now, I never dreamed this was going to happen, and I really had no idea. But if you really look at the average company with 7 different systems of record in HR, you need something to bring it all together and make it easy for employees. If you're lucky enough to have a big IT department, you can build a massive HR portal, but there's a generation of new tools being built in this red area to deliver the employee experience and shield your employees from the complexities of the back-end HR systems. And that is going to be a major part of HR too. And hopefully the goal of that is to deliver all the different things we do in HR in the flow of work. So that's kind of what's going on in 20 minutes, and I apologize for going a little bit over. But we're really in the cusp of what I really think is an entirely new world of HR technology, a new set of tools, a new set of vendors. None of the incumbents are going to go away, but you're going to have to be careful and really watch out for this. And I would say really the guiding light that I would recommend is try to think about these as systems of productivity, tools that will make people more effective in their jobs and delivered to them in the flow of work. So Esther, thank you very much for inviting me up here again, and I apologize for going a little bit over this morning. Thank you.